Armies are not stopped by bullets. Bullets slow them down, but rivers stop them cold. A 35-ton tank cannot swim. A column of trucks cannot float. And when the bridge ahead of you is a pile of twisted steel sitting at the bottom of a riverbed, your entire war stops moving. The German army understood this perfectly. They had a standing order. When you retreat, you destroy every bridge behind you, every one. Stone arches, railway viaducts, concrete overpasses, all of it demolished. And in Europe come out a continent sliced by the Rhine, the Seine, the Volturno, the Meuse, the Waal, and hundreds of smaller rivers. This meant the Allied advance hit water again and again and again. And every single time the bridge was already gone. This was not a side problem. This was the problem. The speed of your advance, the survival of your supply lines, whether you caught the retreating enemy or whether he escaped and made you fight the same battle 50 miles further east. All of it depended on one thing. How fast can you get across that river? In Italy, river after river, every bridge in pieces. In France after D-Day, the same. At the Rhine, Hitler gave an explicit order: destroy every crossing and execute any officer who fails. They did not fail. By March 1945, every bridge over the Rhine was gone. So how do you move a modern army across a river with no bridge? How do you build one strong enough for a 40-ton tank, fast enough to matter and simple enough to assemble while someone is shooting at you? The answer came from the most unlikely place imaginable. Not a military genius, not a famous university. A quiet, pipe-smoking civil servant, so modest that his own bank teller had no idea he had been knighted. A man who sketched the solution on the back of an envelope, riding in a car through the English countryside. His name was Donald Bailey. But before we get to the envelope, we need to understand the man. Because nothing about Donald Bailey's biography suggests he was about to change the course of a world war. He was born on the 15th of September, 1901, in Rotherham, a grey industrial town in South Yorkshire, surrounded by steelworks and coal mines. His father was a bank cashier. His mother stayed at home. He was their only child. No military dynasty, no aristocratic connections, no fortune, just a quiet family in a quiet town. But young Donald had one obsession that set him apart. He built bridges, not real ones, miniature ones, out of wooden sticks and bits of string, testing how much weight each design could hold before it collapsed. While other boys kicked footballs in the street, Bailey was running his own engineering laboratory on the living room floor. He was solving structural problems before he even knew the word structure. He studied engineering at the University of Sheffield, the local university, nothing glamorous, and graduated in 1923. His early career was perfectly unremarkable. He designed factory buildings for the Rowntree Chocolate Company in York. He worked on railway projects. He helped build a municipal reservoir. Good, honest, invisible work, the kind that never makes a headline and never will. Then in 1928, Bailey took a job that would quietly define the rest of his life. He joined the experimental bridging establishment in Christchurch, a small coastal town in southern England. The EBE was a tiny department within the War Office, tasked with designing portable military bridges. It was not prestigious. It was barely funded. The entire staff numbered fewer than 20 people, and the government kept threatening to shut it down entirely. Bailey earned less than £400 a year. He worked in a cramped office, ran calculations by hand, and thought about one question endlessly. How do you build a bridge that soldiers can carry, assemble fast, and drive a tank across? He was quiet. He smoked a pipe. He wore plain suits. He did not network, did not self-promote, did not seek attention. He simply thought about bridges, day after day, year after year. Decades later, after the war, after the knighthood, a bank teller in Bournemouth would be genuinely shocked to learn that the polite, unremarkable gentleman who visited her counter every week, the one who never mentioned anything special about himself, was Sir Donald Bailey, the man whose invention had carried Allied armies across every river in Europe. That was Donald Bailey, the kind of man you pass on the street without a second glance, and the kind of man who was about to hear the British government ask a very specific question about him. A question that, in hindsight, became the most ironic sentence in the history of military engineering. Now, the British military was not stupid. They knew rivers were a problem. They had engineers working on portable bridges for years, but every design they came up with ran into the same wall. You could make a bridge strong, or you could make it light. You could make it fast to build, or you could make it reliable. But nobody could make one that did all of those things at the same time. The most respected design was the English bridge, invented by a Cambridge professor, no less. It used tubular steel members arranged in a scissor-like pattern that could be extended across a gap, elegant on paper, a nightmare in the field. It was complicated to assemble, required specially trained crews, and could only support about 19 tons. A Sherman tank weighed 35, a Churchill over 40. The English bridge could get your infantry across, but your armour, the thing that actually wins battles, stayed on the wrong side of the river. Then there was the small box girder, heavier, stronger, built from steel box sections, bolted together on site. It could handle more weight, but each panel weighed between 500 and 700 kilograms. You needed 12 to 15 men just to move one piece. In a combat zone, where every exposed soldier is a target and every second matters, requiring that many hands on a single component was not engineering. It was a death sentence. The Callender Hamilton Bridge tried something different. Standardized parts connected with nuts and bolts. Hundreds of them. Every joint had to be tightened by hand with a wrench. In daylight with no pressure, this took hours. Under fire, with frozen fingers, in the dark, in the rain, it took forever. Bolts cross-threaded, wrenches slipped. A bridge that needs 400 bolts tightened while machine gun rounds are hitting the water around you is not a bridge anyone wants to build. And pontoon bridges, floating platforms on inflatable boats or metal floats, fast to deploy, yes, but they could only carry about 11 tons, a third of what a medium tank weighed, and they were completely at the mercy of the current. A strong river could drag the whole structure downstream. Rising water could tear it apart. A few artillery rounds could sink it in minutes, stranding an entire division mid-crossing. So this was the reality. The British Army needed a bridge that could carry 40 tons. That was light enough for a small crew to handle without cranes. That went up in hours, not days. That worked on any river, any gap, any terrain. And that was simple enough for exhausted men to assemble in the dark, under fire, with no special tools. No existing design could do even 3 of those 5 things. The heavy ones were too heavy to move. The light ones were too weak to matter. The fast ones could not carry tanks. The strong ones took days to build. It was, by every reasonable measure, an impossible problem. And this is where Donald Bailey enters the story, not with a triumph, but with a rejection. Throughout the 1930s, the British government was cutting military spending to the bone. The experimental bridging establishment in Christchurch, already tiny, was being squeezed further every year. Staff were let go. Budgets were slashed. By the mid-30s, the entire department was down to 17 people. 17 engineers responsible for every portable bridge in the British military. And then came the memo. Somewhere in the bowels of the Treasury, a bureaucrat looked at the EBE payroll and wrote a question that would become one of the great historical ironies of the 20th century. Is Mr. Bailey really necessary? Was he necessary? The man who was about to design the single most important piece of military equipment in the entire war, and a government accountant was asking whether they should fire him to save £400 a year. Bailey survived the cuts. He kept his job, kept his small office, kept his pipe and his calculations. And in 1936 he did something that should have changed everything. He proposed a new idea. A bridge built from flat, rectangular, modular steel panels. Identical panels that could be connected quickly without bolts, stacked in different configurations for different loads and carried by a small team of men. The core concept was simple, radical, and, as history would prove, absolutely correct. The War Office said no, they were not interested. They had already committed to the English Bridge Mark III, the upgraded version of the Cambridge professor's design. It was the official choice, the approved solution, the bridge that had institutional backing and prestigious academic credentials behind it. Bailey's idea, from a low-ranking civil servant with no famous name and no powerful allies, was pushed aside. He was told, in effect, to forget about it and focus on other work. He did not forget. For 4 years, while the War Office poured money and attention into the English program, Bailey kept refining his concept in the margins, sketching in notebooks, running calculations at his desk, thinking about panel dimensions, connection methods, load distribution. Not because anyone asked him to, not because anyone cared, but because he knew, with the quiet certainty of a man who had been building model bridges since childhood, that his idea was right. All he needed was for the approved solution to fail. And in the winter of 1940, it did. Late 1940. Britain was at war, and the bridge problem was becoming desperate. The army needed to move heavy armor across rivers, and fast. The War Office had pinned all its hopes on the English Mark III, the upgraded version of the Cambridge design. Millions had been spent, schedules had been drawn up, production was being planned. Everything was riding on this one bridge, and it was not working. During field trials, the English Mark III kept failing. The structure was too complex. Assembly was too slow. Components did not fit together reliably. The bridge that was supposed to solve everything was turning into an expensive embarrassment, and the men at the top of the military engineering chain knew it. One day in late 1940, after yet another disappointing round of trials, Donald Bailey found himself in a car with his superiors, Major Stewart and Colonel Fowle, driving back to Christchurch. The mood was grim. The English had failed again, and nobody had a backup plan. Bailey reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope, and started drawing. What he sketched in that car was not a minor improvement. It was a completely different way of thinking about bridges. 3 breakthroughs, captured in a few pencil lines on the back of an envelope. First, flat rectangular panels instead of box girders. Every previous military bridge used 3-dimensional structural sections that were heavy, awkward, and required careful alignment. Bailey's panels were flat, 10 feet long, 5 feet tall, 6.5 inches deep, simple steel rectangles with a diagonal cross brace welded inside, light enough for 6 men to carry, stackable, identical, every single panel exactly the same as every other panel. Second, pin connections instead of bolts. This was the detail that changed everything. Instead of hundreds of nuts and bolts that had to be tightened with wrenches, Bailey's panels connected with steel pins. Short rods that dropped through aligned holes and were locked in place with a tap of a hammer. 1 motion, 1 second, done. No wrenches, no threading, no fumbling in the dark. A connection method so simple that a man who had never seen the bridge before could learn it in minutes. Third, a through-type design that could be launched from one bank. Previous bridges required work on both sides of the river. which meant you needed soldiers on the far bank, the one the enemy was usually defending. Bailey's bridge was assembled entirely on the near bank and pushed forward on rollers, sliding out over the gap until it reached the other side. You built it behind cover and shoved it across. No one had to swim. No one had to be exposed on the far shore. 3 ideas. 1 envelope, 1 car ride. His superiors looked at the sketch and saw something promising, but they were not ready to abandon the English program. Not yet. Bailey was told to develop his concept further, but to do it in his own time. The official money was still going to the approved design. Then came the 23rd of January, 1941. The English Mark III was put through its final structural test, and it broke. The bridge physically failed under load. Years of investment, months of planning, the entire official bridging strategy of the British Army collapsed along with it. Suddenly, Donald Bailey's envelope sketch was the only idea left in the room. On the 14th of February, 1941, Valentine's Day, the War Office formally requested a prototype of Bailey's design. The quiet man with the pipe had been right all along. And now, with a war on and no bridge to fight it with, the entire military establishment was finally ready to listen. So what exactly did Bailey design? What made this bridge so different from everything that came before? The answer is brutal simplicity. A design so logical that once you understand it, you wonder why nobody thought of it sooner. The heart of the Bailey Bridge is one single component, a steel panel, a flat rectangle, 10 feet long by 5 feet tall, weighing roughly 570 pounds, about 270 kilograms. 6 men could pick one up and carry it into position. No crane, no forklift, no special equipment. 6 pairs of hands and a bit of muscle. That was the entire lifting mechanism. Each panel was identical, not similar, identical. Every panel that rolled off the production line was exactly the same dimensions, the same weight, the same hole pattern as every other panel. This was the genius of the whole system. There were no left panels and right panels, no top sections and bottom sections, no part A that only connects to part B. Every piece fit everywhere. If you could carry it, you could place it. If you could place it, it would connect. And the connection itself was the single cleverest detail in the entire design. No bolts, no nuts, no wrenches, just a steel pin. A short rod of manganese molybdenum steel weighing about 6 pounds that dropped through aligned holes in 2 adjacent panels. One tap with a hammer and the pin locked into place. The connection was made. Under combat conditions, in the dark, in the rain, with gloves on, a soldier could join 2 panels together in seconds. Not minutes, seconds. Now here is where it gets really interesting. Because Bailey did not design just one bridge. He designed a system. The same identical panels could be arranged in different configurations to handle different loads, need a light crossing for infantry and jeeps. Single row of panels on each side, what the engineers called single. Takes a 40-man crew about 3 hours. Need something heavier for trucks and light armor. Stack 2 rows of panels side by side, double single. Same panels, same pins, just more of them. Need to drive a 40-ton Churchill tank across. Go to double, 2 rows of panels on each side, 2 stories high. And for the heaviest loads imaginable, 70 tons and above. Triple, 3 rows wide, 3 rows high. The same basic panel, scaled up to carry almost anything the military could put on wheels or tracks. And the most remarkable feature of all, you could upgrade a bridge while it was standing. If you built a single crossing for infantry, and then the situation changed and you needed tanks to cross, you did not have to tear it down and start over. You simply bolted additional panels onto the existing structure, reinforcing it in place. The bridge grew stronger without ever being disassembled. The entire thing could be transported on standard 3-ton military trucks. No special vehicles, no oversized loads, no permits. You loaded the panels flat on the back of ordinary trucks, drove them to the river, unloaded them, and started building. A bridge that could span 70 meters and carry a tank, and delivered on the same trucks that carried food and ammunition. Engineers who saw it for the first time often described it the same way. It was like a giant Meccano set, a life-size construction toy designed for adults in a war zone, except this toy could carry the weight of the entire Allied advance across Europe. The prototype had to be built fast. Britain was at war, the old bridge program had just collapsed, and the army had nothing to replace it with. Bailey and his small team at Christchurch worked through the spring of 1941 at a pace that would be remarkable even today. But first, the design had to be tested, and the way they tested it tells you everything about the improvised, resourceful spirit of wartime British engineering. They needed to simulate the weight of a modern heavy tank rolling across the bridge. They did not have a modern heavy tank available for testing, so they found a Mark V, a lumbering relic from the First World War, and parked it on the bridge deck. Not heavy enough. So they hoisted 2 smaller Whippet tanks onto the roof of the Mark V. Still not heavy enough. So they filled the insides of all 3 tanks with pig iron, crude blocks of cast iron, packed in until the whole absurd stack weighed as much as the heaviest vehicle the bridge would ever need to carry. A tower of 3 antique tanks stuffed with pig iron, sitting on a bridge designed by a man the Treasury had almost fired. This was not how things were supposed to work, but it worked. On the 1st of May 1941, less than 3 months after the formal request, Bailey's team assembled the first complete prototype across the River Stour in Christchurch. 70 feet of bridge, built from scratch by a standard crew. Assembly time, 36 minutes. The military observers were stunned. No bridge in the British inventory had ever gone up that fast. Nothing even came close. The design was approved immediately. Now came the next impossible task, mass production. Bailey's bridge was brilliantly simple, but the country needed tens of thousands of panels, and fast. Britain's major steel factories were already running at full capacity, producing tanks, ships, and aircraft. There was no spare industrial capacity, so the War Office did something extraordinary. They farmed the work out to over 650 small firms across Britain, companies that had never made anything military in their lives, greenhouse manufacturers, bedstead factories, makers of rowing oars, companies that built garden sheds and metal fences. Even Littlewoods, a company best known for running football betting pools, was given contracts to produce Bailey Bridge components. The logic was simple. If your factory had a welding torch and workers who could read a blueprint, you could make Bailey panels. The design was that straightforward. And because every single panel was identical, quality control was absolute. Every panel was tested before it left the factory. Every pin, every transom, every bearing was checked against the same specification. A panel made in a greenhouse factory in Norfolk had to be perfectly interchangeable with a panel made in a bedstead workshop in Birmingham. And they were. The system demanded perfection, and got it. At peak production, British factories were turning out 25,000 panels every month. By the end of the war, over 700,000 panels had been manufactured. Nearly 500,000 metric tons of steel, shaped into identical rectangles, ready to be carried by 6 men and hammered together with a pin. If you laid every Bailey panel produced during the war end to end, the line would stretch from London to St. Petersburg. A quiet man's envelope sketch had become one of the largest military manufacturing programs in British history. The first completed bridges were delivered to the Army in December 1941. From envelope sketch to mass production, less than a year. From rejected idea to the backbone of Allied logistics, less than 2. And the bridge had not seen a single day of combat yet. That was about to change. The 26th of November, 1942, the Medjerda River, Tunisia. North Africa was the proving ground, the first place where Allied forces met the German army on the ground in large numbers, and the first place where the Bailey Bridge went to war. The 237th Field Company of the Royal Engineers assembled a Bailey crossing over the Medjerda under operational conditions. Not under direct fire, but in a combat zone, with enemy forces nearby, under time pressure, with real consequences if something went wrong. The bridge went up, it held, vehicles rolled across, no failures, no delays. The design that had been sketched on an envelope 2 years earlier had just passed its first real test. But Tunisia was the easy part. What came next was something else entirely. Sicily, July 1943. The Allied invasion of southern Europe had begun, and the fighting was brutal. On the 21st of July, near the hilltop town of Léonfort, the 3rd Field Company of the Royal Canadian Engineers was ordered to build a Bailey Bridge across a deep ravine, right at the edge of the front line. The problem was straightforward and terrifying. The Germans were still there, not a mile away, not half a mile away, 50 meters away, close enough to see the sappers working, close enough to hear the hammers. Major K.J. Southern was in command. He arrived at the bridging site and found himself looking directly at a German machine gun position and 2 tanks barely 50 meters from where his men needed to work. Any sane assessment would have called the mission suicidal. Southern made a different calculation. He gathered a small group of soldiers armed with nothing heavier than rifles and submachine guns, positioned them facing the German armor, and opened fire, not to destroy the tanks, which was impossible with small arms, but to bluff them, to make the German crews believe they were facing a larger force, to buy time. It worked for 4 hours while Southern's men kept up their deception. The sappers behind them hammered pins into panels, section by section under mortar fire, building a Bailey Bridge in what was essentially the front yard of the German defensive line. They finished the bridge, vehicles crossed, the advance continued. 21 awards were given for that single night of work at Léonfort, the first time a Bailey Bridge was built under direct enemy fire. And then came Italy, where the Bailey Bridge stopped being a useful tool and became the entire foundation of the Allied campaign. Italy is a country made of rivers. From the toe of the boot to the Alps, the terrain is one river crossing after another, and the retreating Germans made sure every single one was impassable. In 20 months of fighting up the Italian peninsula, Allied engineers built over 3,000 Bailey bridges. 3,000. That is roughly 5 bridges every single day for nearly 2 years. The numbers from Italy sound like they belong in a different war. At the Sangro River, engineers constructed a crossing that stretched 1,126 feet, at the time the longest Bailey Bridge ever built. Field Marshal Montgomery drove across it personally. At the Volturno, a single Bailey suspension bridge carried 240,000 vehicles over 8 months. 240,000, an average of 1,000 vehicles per day, rolling across a bridge that did not exist before the sappers built it. But the most dramatic moment came at Florence. In August 1944, as the Allies approached the city, the Germans carried out one of the most calculated acts of architectural destruction of the entire war. In a single night, they demolished 5 of the 6 historic bridges across the Arno, masterpieces of Renaissance engineering, some of them centuries old. Only the Ponte Vecchio was spared, and even that was blocked by rubble from the buildings destroyed on both sides of it. Florence, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, was cut in half. and the only way to reconnect it was the Bailey Bridge. Allied engineers built two massive crossings, side by side, each stretching over 1,400 feet, right through the heart of the city where Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci had once walked. Steel panels and hammer-driven pins standing where marble and stone had stood for 500 years. It was not elegant, but it worked, and it kept the advance moving. By the time the Italian campaign ground to a halt, the Bailey Bridge had proven something that no other piece of military equipment had ever demonstrated so clearly. It was not just useful, it was essential. Without it, the Allied army in Italy would have stopped at the first demolished crossing and never moved again. If Italy proved the Bailey Bridge was essential, the invasion of France proved it was everywhere. On the 6th of June 1944, D-Day, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious assault in history, and right behind the infantry, packed into landing craft, alongside ammunition and medical supplies, were stacks of Bailey Bridge panels. The planners knew what was coming. Behind those beaches lay a countryside laced with rivers, canals and streams, and the Germans would destroy every crossing they could. The first Bailey Bridge in France went up near Bernouville, just inland from Sword Beach, at 14:15, barely 8 hours after the first wave hit the sand. By midnight on D-Day, 23 Bailey crossings were operational across the Normandy beachhead. 23 bridges in 18 hours, built while the battle was still raging. Bridge equipment was moving forward so fast that construction crews were sometimes building crossings before senior commanders even knew the infantry had reached the river. But Normandy also delivered the Bailey Bridge's most painful lesson, a lesson about what happens when you do not have one ready in time. September 1944, Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's bold, desperate gamble to end the war by Christmas. The plan was to drop paratroopers behind German lines to seize a series of bridges across the Netherlands, while the British 30th Corps raced up a single narrow road to link up with them. Speed was everything. Every hour of delay reduced the chances of success. At the town of Sun, the 101st Airborne Division was supposed to capture the bridge over the Wilhelmina Canal intact. They almost made it. The paratroopers were within meters of the bridge when the Germans detonated the charges and blew it apart. Suddenly the 30th Corps, with its tanks, its trucks, its entire armored column, was stuck on the wrong side of a canal. Engineers rushed a Bailey Bridge forward, but the components had to be brought up along a single congested road under fire. It took 10 hours to build the replacement crossing, 10 hours that the men trapped at Arnhem did not have. The delay at Sun contributed to a total schedule slip of 36 hours. And at Arnhem, 36 hours was the difference between reinforcement and catastrophe. The bridge at Sun was built eventually, but eventually was too late. 6 months later, the Bailey Bridge got its chance for redemption at the biggest river crossing of the entire war. March 1945, the Rhine, the last natural barrier before the heart of Germany. Hitler had given an explicit order: destroy every bridge, execute any officer who fails. After the shock of Remagen, where the Americans had captured a railway bridge intact by sheer speed and luck, the Germans were taking no chances. By the time the British reached the Rhine, every crossing for hundreds of miles had been demolished. The operation to cross the Rhine was the largest river assault since the war began, and at its core, Bailey Bridges. British engineers built 5 major crossings in rapid succession, naming them after London landmarks: Waterloo, Lambeth, London, Blackfriars and Westminster. The longest of them, Blackfriars at the town of Rhys, stretched 1,814 feet across the water. It was the longest Bailey Bridge built during the entire war. 227 truckloads of components, 9,500 man-hours of labor. a bridge nearly 2,000 feet long, assembled by hand, panel by panel, pin by pin, while German artillery tried to stop it. On the 26th of March, Winston Churchill himself crossed the Rhine, walking across a Bailey Bridge nicknamed Digger, built by Australian engineers. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, setting foot on German soil for the first time, carried there by a bridge designed by a civil servant who earned less than £400 a year. By the end of the war, over 4,500 Bailey bridges had been built across every theatre of combat. North Africa, Italy, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Burma, the Pacific. More than 200 miles of bridging laid end to end. The bridge that the War Office had rejected in 1936, that the Treasury had almost defunded, that was sketched on the back of an envelope by a man nobody had heard of, had carried the Allied armies across every river between Tunis and Berlin. And so, what did the men who commanded those armies actually say about Donald Bailey's invention? You've probably heard the most famous quote already. It is attributed to Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, and it goes something like this. The three things that won the war were the Jeep, the Dakota transport plane, and the Bailey Bridge. It is repeated in almost every article, every documentary, every Wikipedia entry about the bridge. There is just one problem. Nobody has ever found the original source. Eisenhower's memoir, Crusade in Europe, published in 1948, does contain a passage about the equipment that mattered most. But the list he gives is different. The bulldozer, the Jeep, the 2.5-ton truck, and the C-47 aircraft. No Bailey Bridge. Some historians cite a different version, that Eisenhower named the Bailey Bridge as one of three pieces of equipment that most contributed to victory in Fortress Europe, alongside radar and the heavy bomber. But the primary source document for this version has never been definitively identified either. The quote exists in a grey zone, widely repeated, probably rooted in something Eisenhower said at some point, but never pinned to a specific page, speech, or letter. What is documented precisely, clearly, and beyond any dispute is what Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery said. Montgomery was not a man who gave praise easily. He was famously difficult, famously arrogant, and famously unwilling to credit anyone but himself. And this is what he wrote about the Bailey Bridge. Bailey bridging made an immense contribution to the war effort. I could never have maintained the speed and tempo of forward movement without large supplies of this equipment. And then the sentence that became the bridge's epitaph. Without the Bailey Bridge, we should not have won the war. Not it helped, not it was useful. We should not have won the war. From Montgomery, a man who rarely admitted he needed anything from anyone. This was the highest possible praise. He was not alone. Major General Chris Vokes called it one of the greatest advances in military engineering. General Gifford LeCaine Martel, himself a pioneer of tank warfare, said the Bailey Bridge doubled the effective value of Allied armoured units. And in 1977, the film A Bridge Too Far gave the bridge its most cinematic tribute. Michael Caine, playing a British officer, describing it as that glorious, precision-made, British-built bridge which is the envy of the civilized world. The quotes tell a consistent story. The men who fought the war, not historians, not journalists, but the commanders who had to move armies across rivers, considered the Bailey Bridge not just important, but indispensable. The war could not have been won without it, and the man who designed it was still living quietly in Christchurch, smoking his pipe, telling nobody. So what did Donald Bailey get for all of this? For designing the invention that, by the words of the men who used it, helped win the largest war in human history. In 1943, he received an OBE. In 1946, a knighthood. The Netherlands awarded him the Commander of the Order of Orange Nassau in gratitude for the bridges that had liberated their country. These were genuine honours, but honours do not pay the rent. In 1948, the Royal Commission on Awards to Inventors reviewed Bailey's case and granted him a one-time payment of £12,000. No royalties, no percentage of production, no ongoing income from the hundreds of thousands of panels that were still being used and sold around the world. £12,000, and that was the end of it. To put that in perspective, over 700,000 panels had been manufactured. The bridge was being exported to dozens of countries. Governments and private companies were buying surplus Bailey equipment by the shipload. The invention was worth an almost incalculable fortune, and its creator received a single check. There was also a patent dispute. M. Hamilton, the designer of the older Calendar Hamilton Bridge, argued that Bailey's design infringed on elements of his earlier patent. The case went to court. Hamilton was awarded £10,000 in compensation. So the man whose bridge Bailey had effectively made obsolete received almost as much money as Bailey himself. After the war, Bailey continued working quietly in government service. He became director of the Military Engineering Experimental Establishment in Christchurch, essentially running the same small department where he had spent his entire career. Later, he served as Dean of the Royal Military College of Science at Shrivenham before retiring in 1966. His wife Phyllis passed away in 1971. Bailey later married his housekeeper. He lived out his final years in Bournemouth, the same quiet coastal area where he had spent his working life. He tended his garden. He smoked his pipe. He did not give interviews or write memoirs or seek attention. On the 5th of May 1985, Sir Donald Bailey was gone. He was 83 years old. His estate was valued at £45,276, less than the cost of a modest house. For a man whose invention had carried armies across continents, whose steel panels were still holding up bridges on every inhabited landmass on Earth, this was the final quiet sum of a quiet life. His home in Bournemouth was later demolished. No blue plaque was ever placed on the site. No statue was erected. The man who designed what Montgomery called the bridge without which the war could not have been won left almost no physical trace in the country he helped save. But the bridge did not stop when the war ended. It just kept going. In 1975, a ship struck the Tasman Bridge in Hobart, Tasmania, splitting the city in half. Engineers assembled a Bailey crossing 788 meters long, the longest in the world, reconnecting 50,000 residents for 2 years. After September 11th, modified Bailey-type bridges helped clear Ground Zero in New York. Kashmir 2005, Nepal 2015, Mumbai 2018. 80 years after the war, flat panels, steel pins, 6 men, still saving lives. And in Stanpit Marshes, Christchurch, a short walk from the office where Bailey spent his career. The original prototype still stands. It is a pedestrian bridge now. People walk their dogs across it. Most of them have no idea what it is. In Oxford, a Bailey Bridge from 1947 has carried traffic for 78 years without replacement. Donald Bailey sketched the future on the back of an envelope. His invention carried armies, reconnected cities, and rescued communities on every continent. And the world quietly, completely forgot his name.